Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm host Jill Malandrino, and joining me is Helena Wedin, European Head of Business Development of ETF and ETP at Nasdaq, and Sylvester Andersen, European Head of Sales at ETF and ETP at Nasdaq, to discuss the rise of the Nordic ETF market and its most recent developments. It is great to have the both of you with us. Helena, let's start with you. How are you seeing the ETF market developing in Europe in comparison to the US?
Right. Thank you, Jill, so much for having me here today. So looking at US compared to Europe, you need to remember that US started in 1993, ETF trading, while Europe came out 2000s, which means that US is around 7 years ahead of Europe. Now, that does not always explain all, the difference between the market, because if you also look at sort of the size of the market, US is much bigger. It's composed of $10 trillion dollars of assets right now, compared to Europe that has $2 trillion of assets. But looking at listings, we have 12,000 listings in Europe compared to 3,600 listings in US, which means that if you look then at the market, European market, 12,000 listings traded on 29 exchanges versus 3 exchanges in US, the European market is much more fragmented. You can also say that it's much more flexible in terms that the investor can actually pick and choose which market to trade on, which exchange, which currency, and which post-trade path they want to choose. And that is the difference between sort of these continents in total. Another difference that we see is the size of the retail trading into the ETF market. In US, that is around 25%, while in Europe is 5 to 7%. And that is something we really believe will change in Europe, because currently many sort of retail clients are trading into mutual funds that has a sort of added cost of distribution to the asset under management fee that I don't see in the ETF. So if you compare those two sort of streams, then it will be much more cost efficient for the retail client to trade into the ETF, and retail clients becoming more and more cost aware, and they also like the accessibility of trading ETFs over an exchange, as well as they are using digital platforms to a larger extent compared to sort of taking advice from a bank directly. So these are the differences that will drive the retail trading indeed into the ETFs in Europe, as we believe. Something big in US that we talk a lot about right now is actively managed funds, actively managed ETFs. That is a trend that we haven't seen to the same extent in Europe, but we will expect that to sort of grow as well over time, either through mutual fund conversions into ETFs or the possibility to actually list a fund share class ETF, mutual fund share class into an ETF.
So, Helena, if we zoom in specifically on the Nordics, what are the current dynamics of exchange-traded funds in that particular region?
Yeah, so in the Nordics, all retail investors, I would say, are actually owning funds, mutual funds, but not so much ETFs. So we had the first ETF already in 2000, at the same time as the European ETF market started, but it hasn't grown in the same way as we've seen in the rest of Europe. It's a quite small market, although quite sophisticated because we were out early. But the mutual fund industry is huge. But the same trend that I talked about just a second ago, we expect that to happen also here in the Nordics, and maybe to a larger extent. We expect actually some of that sort of flows going from the retail client into passive funds. That is something that is to some extent challenging the existing mutual fund industry, and we expect them to look more closely at adding ETFs as a sort of additional distribution channel. We also believe that sort of digital platforms and the increased interest in this market will sort of continue to spur this.
All right, and Sylvester, let's bring you into the conversation. What do you see as fueling the growth of ETFs in the Nordics?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me back here, Jill. Appreciate it. Yeah, so I think it's a variety of factors, right? I think we have a notoriously high degree of financial literacy in the Nordics. I think during COVID, we saw this massive inflow of especially young investors. So we're seeing this demographic massive change into the market, and obviously that changes the whole investor paradigm. And that's really been fueling the ETF adoption in general throughout the Nordics. Then we have a favorable regulatory tailwind with multiple national and across EU initiatives either already implemented or coming up, such as the EU Retail Investor Initiative, which is really fueling transparency, the empowerment of regular citizens into easily understandable offerings. And I think the third element I would highlight is the tech development, which is really stimulating folks to set up new trading accounts, adopting ETFs as a very big part of their investment strategies. It's just becoming easier and easier and easier for all citizens throughout the Nordics to set up an account with the retail brokerage firms. That seems to be working really, really well. A fourth pillar I would say or highlight is the increase of monthly savings accounts that are pretty much being integrated into all conventional banks and also the retail platforms investment offerings to the clients. We're seeing that outside of Nordics, but that is something that is really, really increasing popularity in the Nordics right now.
And Sylvester, let's take a look at the distribution side. What feedback have you received from the market regarding local ETF listings?
Right. So I think it's important to highlight that we're traditionally here in Scandinavia, mutual fund markets. We have very, very large fund markets here. But what we hear from pretty much all segments is a need for efficient, low-cost instruments. There is a need for vehicles that are really catering to the local flavors. And local listings is something we increasingly sense an appetite for. Of course, because of the transparency and the distribution, but if you look at the actual investors taking up ETFs, then it's all about cost. So when you have, and that's the big benefits with local ETFs here in Europe, you're not paying holding fees, you're not paying FX fees, provided it's in your local currency. And the trading fees, commission fees, if you will, that you're paying are as if you were trading any other local security. So there's a rapidly growing appetite for that.
All right. And Helena, to wrap up here, have you seen other initiatives from issuers to capture more interest from clients?
Yes, definitely. So when this market started, it was very much about sort of, benchmark indices and creating funds on that, like S&P 500 or OMX S30, as we talk about in the Nordics here a lot. But over time, we went over into creating sort of different products in order to attract more investors, basically, and also differentiate themselves against others. So then we started about smart beta funds, for example, additional sort of, logic into the fund. We have an example of that in the Nordics, high yield, low volatility, for example. Other things could be thematics that you're looking very closely into, for example, defense or cybersecurity or biochemistry. Then you should create a very sort of narrow sort of, fund for that specific sector or theme. Another theme is digital assets that we see been growing a lot during the last weeks with crypto ETPs. But this not only creates sort of, a good opportunity to sell more products for the issuer, it's also create a great opportunity for the investors to trade in and out and create their own type of portfolio, really. Instead of just, buying the broader benchmark, they could pick and choose between various funds and create a very sort of tailored portfolio for themselves.
All right. Appreciate both of your insights. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.